Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to my YouTube channel. I am your host, the Mighty Bjorn, and here we are once again with another episode of Community Steel. Kicking off today's episode with the 44M TAS by Gunter, and this weighs in at 35.83 tons, so almost 36 tons. It is armed with a 80 millimeter main gun with 140 millimeters of penetration, and this is actually for the mid-war period. So realistically, not bad statistically speaking when it comes to the gun's penetration. You know, it would go up against a Tiger pretty well as long as it's facing off that Tiger at least head on. The armor's very sloped. It kind of reminds me of maybe a stab at doing a Panther, if you will, is kind of what this reminds me of. Besides the Panthers, I am going up against Panthers, and unfortunately, the gun just doesn't have enough. The angled armor and the thickness of the Panther here just doesn't do the trick, and the armor, unfortunately, is just not good enough to protect it from the Panther that I have loaded currently in my Sprocket files, which is, it's actually my Panther. It's a pretty tough nut to crack, even with this, even with the 140 millimeters of penetration. I'd have to rely on either hitting the side or hitting the lower glacis plate, and just at the ranges I'm engaging at here, just can't really reliably do that. Mobility wise, looks wise, I think the vehicle looks great. Mobility is pretty damn good too. I like how the engine deck is constructed. He took the time with that, the way the exhaust works, everything else. I mean, it does feel like, you know, maybe a clone or something along the lines of a Panther tank. There's a lot of features here that I can spot, look at, and go, yeah, that was definitely taken from a Panther. But either ways, yeah, pretty cool tank. I like it. Let's move on to the next one. Here we go. Something very basic. German train, going with a basic bitch today. This is the ATL M6 from German train. Weighs in at 14 tons. It is armed with a 51 millimeter main gun with 61 millimeters of penetration. This is also for the mid-war, which kind of throws me off because this really reminds me of like a Panzer 38T. So it's really interesting that he made it mid-war, not interwar. But either ways, the vehicle actually does work fairly well. The armor's okay-ish, nothing great. The gun is fairly okay, although I was having problems like kind of getting it sight in here to hit that vehicle. Mobility's, it's not bad. It's pretty mediocre, but it works. The only thing that's a real downfall is when this mission loaded, it had me go up against a man-o-war, and this thing's gun just does not have enough penetration for something like a man-o-war. And even for the mid-war period, it's going to struggle against vehicles like a Sherman, especially with only 61 millimeters of penetration. I don't even think you can penetrate the frontal arc of a Sherman, even the lower glacis plate, mostly because of the shaping on a Sherman. Now, that being said, even if you're fighting against Shermans, the side and the rear is still an option. And this vehicle could actually have the mobility to do said feat. Not 100% sure because I didn't fight against Shermans. The next vehicle here is the Mark 49 from Kenshi 2900. And this monstrosity weighs in at 217.12 tons. This is literally the heaviest vehicle I've ever featured on Community Steel. So Kenshi holds a record here for me. This is made for the late war period, and I'm also not going to take time to go over the vehicle's armaments because it's got a lot of armaments. I mean, it's got 4 rocket launchers, it's got like twin auto cannons and a machine gun, and it's got like a 130 millimeter main gun, and yeah, just all kinds of ridiculous stuff going on here with this thing. This thing is just firepower. Now, it does have some armor, even though it can kill itself, because you can actually get the rocket launchers to face down into the hull. I don't know why it's not happening here, because when I did my testing, my initial testing, I actually did kill myself blasting away with this thing on myself. When it comes to speed and maneuverability, oh, this thing is absolute trash. It's hideous. Especially its turn radius. The turn radius on this thing is just horrendous. All right, the next vehicle I have here is the Tau Hammerhead. This is from Skylar 18, and I have no clue what's going on with this vehicle when it does that. So initially when it spawns in, it does that every time the gun does a 180 or whatever every single time. But it weighs in at 38.38 tons. It's armed with a 116 millimeter main gun with 184 millimeters of penetration. It also has 2 gun drones, and the gun drones are armed with 39 millimeter main guns, autocannons, with 121 millimeters of penetration. So actually they got some pretty good penetration, probably better than what they should have. And this is for the late war period. I'm not going to lie, I'm not impressed by this thing's mobility, and I am not impressed by this thing's... I don't know how I want to put it, but basically when I was trying to drive it, I tried driving it on Taiga, and I was just literally slamming into everything. The way it looks really fools you on essentially the impact model of this vehicle. Now, that being said, the vehicle actually does look like a Hammerhead. I'll give them credit for that. The armor actually does hold up pretty well for the most part, but what I did find is that the commander's cupola sticking out there is a weak spot, and almost anything can penetrate that area. But that being said, the vehicle actually does look like a Tau Hammerhead, so I'll give them credit for that. I actually rather like it in the sense of the looks. I just don't know if I'd want to play this thing too often. And the next vehicle I have here is from Mizuzu. Oh my God. I'm so bad with that guy's name. I'm going to come up with a nickname for him. But this is his Mark I. This is a Japanese boat tank thing. I don't know. But it is for the mid-war period. It is actually turretless. But it's got a very wide gun arc. It's actually got decent gun depression and elevation. It weighs in at 45.61 tons. It's probably a little heavier than it should be, considering I would guess that it's supposed to be amphibious, especially because it's shaped like a boat and actually has rudders. So there's that. But with it being heavier, it also does give it a bit of armor. It is armed with a 57 millimeter main gun with 120 millimeters of penetration. And I have no idea where it is, but this thing does have a weak spot. I think it's actually the commander's cupola is what they're shooting at. Because as you can see, the commander's cupola sticks out there. And even when I go hull down, these lightly gunned tanks were killing me. I actually got dominated by my own T-45s while running this thing, even though I think the vehicle itself looks rather cool. And it is, like I said, it's for the mid-war period. Mobility-wise, it's okay-ish. Yeah, feels bad, man. All right, the final vehicle I have here is the Object 430 from Sergey 01002. I actually did an extensive history and outline of the Object 430. If you look at my Armored Warfare stuff, you will find a video titled God of War. And that's literally the best game I've ever played in an Object 430. Because this thing is usually trash. Understand that this is a prototype for the T-55. Well, at least this is one of the prototypes for the T-55. The other prototype would be the Object 432, which had a lot of changes that would end up becoming the T-55. But this weighs in at 37.1 tons. It does have the 100 millimeter main gun, as it should. And it's got 248 millimeters of penetration, so it's got a hell of a lot of penetration. Reload speed's not bad. The armor is not very reliable, unfortunately. I don't know if it's the lower glacis plate. I know the sides is pretty thin and the rear is pretty thin, but there is definitely a weak spot somewhere on the front of this vehicle as well. It is for the late war period. Obviously, it would be because it is a Cold War tank. It's a Cold War tank prototype. Mobility is actually rather good, and it sits rather low to the ground. Got that nice mushroom dome turret that Soviet vehicles are naturally known for. The gun velocity, accuracy, etc. is actually rather good. Yeah, let's get a shot laid in there. Of course, most of my shots are getting missed because I'm old and shit. That's more so me than the actual tank itself. But all in all, this is not a bad vehicle from Sergey. Anyway, folks, I'm going to wrap up today's episode of Community Steel. Hopefully, you all enjoyed it. Thank you very much for tuning in, and have yourself a wonderful day.